I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today we're going to ask, is Theism as absurd as Polytheism according to David Hume? David Hume provides a masterclass on how to damn with faint praise in the natural history of religion. He overtly extols theism in the opening pages, making claims for a single intelligent creator, while starkly contrasting the self-evident nature of theism with the barbarous and corrupt nature of polytheism. According to Hume, no rational enquirer can, after serious reflection, suspend his belief a moment with regard to the primary principles of genuine theism and religion. Yet, is Hume covertly demonstrating in his account of the natural history of religion that man's theism is as ridiculous as his polytheism? The goal of this study is to defend my interpretation of Hume equating theism with polytheism after he has shown polytheism to be absurd. This is done by first analyzing how, as the natural history of religion proceeds, Hume stealthily changes tack from his initial praise of theism. Under the guise of a supposedly detached historical approach, he sketches the development of man's religious beliefs, where religion originates in a primitive but natural polytheism which evolves alongside man's development to finally give way to theism. However, Hume remains unsatisfied, as it is not the triumph of reason that guides man to theism. Instead, this evolution is driven by the same underlying forces that had caused man to advance polytheism in his primitive days. The forces of fear, hope, and ignorance, bringing man to the right path of theism, albeit through a perverted reasoning based on superstition. In this way, I show that the natural history of religion is an important piece in Hume's overall philosophical attack on religion, discrediting religion from an anthropological angle by capturing the stupidity of man's approach to religious belief. Next, I survey Hume's religious and non-religious works and examine plausible positions for his personal religious belief to explain how this equating of theism with polytheism as both absurd is important to his wider attack on religion. Chapter 1. Hume's account of the evolution of religion. What is natural religion? In her introduction to Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, the editor Dorothy Coleman ventures a definition. Natural religion is the religious belief, sentiment, and practice founded on evidence that is independent of supernatural religion, clearly differentiating natural religion from revealed religion. Hume's analysis in the natural history of religion explores the causes of religion in man, developing a psychological account in relation to man's environment without once appealing to revelation or the need for faith. However, according to Michel Malherbe, the natural history of religion is not a scientific account of history even by 18th century standards, since it hardly appeals to empirical or historical data. It neither describes the physical condition of men as is expected of a natural history, nor the political events generating change as is expected in a political history. Instead, the natural history of religion reads like a polemic exposition on the superiority of theism compared to primitive polytheism, at least in its beginning. Hume asserts that the wonders of nature is proof of an intelligent creator, and hence no rational person can deny theism. However, he points out that ancient records worldwide shows that all ancient people were polytheists. This is because they project their better characteristics onto multiple deities. These deities are each powerful but limited, and anthropomorphic in terms of their body and motivations, showing clearly how such gods are a figment of man's imagination. Increasing abstraction of these gods' power by man lead finally to a single God who is pure spirit, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Hume is convinced that if men had started their religious pursuit through simply contemplating nature, they would have arrived directly at the belief in a single God who designed the cosmos with one unified plan. However, primitive men, unlearned and constantly struggling to satisfy their needs and desires, are unable to regard the wonders of nature or consider its causes. The perfection of its form appears normal to them, so they do not investigate it. Only deviations can stimulate them to probe further, and with the changes and uncertainties assailing them, they are led to think that multiple and opposing forces are at work. They ascribe these forces with invisible powers and attributes of thought, reason and passion, sometimes giving them the form of man to make them more relatable. These deities are also given backstories related to their domains and take on allegorical characteristics. For example, the god of war is furious, cruel and impetuous. Over time, this polytheism evolved to henotheism. Man's worship of a chief god among the other gods leads them to attribute increasingly powerful qualities and higher praise to that being, finally bringing them to the theistic notion of a perfect being, the creator of the world. This abstraction, however, creates a gulf between man and God. Man then created representations to bring God closer, shifting back towards polytheism. They create intermediaries, which being more familiar become the main objects of worship. The swing back towards theism begins when these ideas become too decadent. Hume's account makes clear that fear and hardships are what draw men to their gods, rather than happy times, which can lead to a neglect of religion. The uncertainty of life's events makes men superstitious and desirous to learn about their gods, on whom their fate depends. These gods are capricious and need to be placated with prayers, sacrifices, rites, and ceremonies. Hume derides such gods as unworthy of worship. He deems polytheists as superstitious atheists whose gods are not the first principle of mind, nor supreme governing entities. These gods did not create the world, and are, like men, subject to fate. Hume judges that such polytheism can hardly be considered religion compared to later religions, which are more just and sublime. However, though theism has become prevalent by Hume's time, Hume remains unsatisfied because this is not from the triumph of reason. He believes people remain ignorant with incurable prejudices in favor of their particular superstitions. Reason should have led theists to believe God had created immutable laws of nature which are allowed to run untrammeled. Instead, theists believe that God continually interferes in human affairs. Rather than searching for causes from natural laws, people ascribe personal or natural disasters to God's intervention. Dispensing with such beliefs and attributing all occurrences to natural laws will even appear impious to most men. Further contrasting the two traditions, Hume explains that polytheism, with its basis in tradition, may tolerate any practice, however barbarous or corrupted, such as human sacrifice, and can admit new gods. Theism, on the other hand, is less tolerant and does not admit other gods, creating an opportunity for its believers to fight with believers of other faiths in the name of doing God's work. According to Hume, such intolerance can be seen in the three major theistic religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Even the human sacrifices of the polytheistic Carthaginians and Mexicans pale in comparison to the massacres associated with the Christian Inquisitions. The corruption of the best things begets the worst, writes Hume. The infinite transcendence of a theistic God, when combined with superstition, can sink the human mind into the lowest submission and abasement, and to represent the monkish virtues of mortification, penance, humility, and passive suffering as the only qualities which are acceptable. The deities of polytheism, by contrast, are so similar to us that we could emulate their best aspects such as activity, spirit, courage, magnanimity, love of liberty, and all the virtues which aggrandize a people. Such a comparison in praise of polytheism comes as a surprise, since it breaks from his earlier claims on the superiority of theism. Hume directly points to how polytheism can lead to the development of important virtues, while theism leads to debasement, but yet he had called polytheists superstitious atheists. As Norman Fate Norton explains, this suggests that Hume thinks that there is an insignificant difference between polytheism and atheism, while maintaining that there is a wide gulf between polytheism and theism. Following this logic, if polytheism is morally superior to theism, and yet polytheists are a type of atheists, it will imply that atheism is morally superior to theism. This view is consistent with Hume's other writings, where, according to Norton, Hume often alludes to how religion does not make morality possible. Religion makes morality impossible, and to the morally corrupting effects of religion. We also see this allegation in the Natural History of Religion, where Hume states that most adherents seek God's favour not through virtue but through frivolous observances. That is because a superstitious person would see virtuous conduct as what is required by society and not done for God's sake. In this way, crimes can be compatible with piety since religious rites can be carried out to absolve wrongs, religion thereby perverting the morality of men. In the Natural History of Religion's final chapter, Hume reiterates that it is universal to believe in invisible intelligent power because God has placed such a belief in man as a trademark. However, superstition has made religious principles for the most part irrational and like sick man's dreams. He accuses the believers of professing certainty in their creed while betraying their uncertainty through their actions. Consistent with his radically empirical approach, Hume speculated that if man had first considered the wonders of creation as his starting point for believing in God, man would have arrived at theism and be closer to a true theism. However, the actual evolution from polytheism to theism, while seemingly logical, only makes sense when considering man's superstitious nature and need for a psychological crutch to relieve his fears. In that light, both the polytheists and theists in Hume's account are really just superstitious atheists. What is the role of the one true God in Hume's account of the natural history of religion? The very fact that God, with a capital G, does not quite feature is precisely the genius of the natural history of religion. God plays no role because he has no role to play. The twin forces of fear and superstition are what drives men to look for invisible powers to worship. As such, this makes the natural history of religion's causal account of religion equally valid whether God exists or not, writes Alan Bailey and Dan O'Brien. Chapter 2. The Role of Religion in Hume's Philosophical Project. According to J.C.A. Gaskin, Hume wrote more on religion than on any other philosophical subject, mostly in a critical way with some of it terminally destructive. Hume's key religious work, The Natural History of Religion, written in 1957, and Dialogues in 1779, were published after many of his non-religious works, including a treatise of human nature, written in 1739 to 1740. Hence, at the time of the publication of The Natural History of Religion and Dialogues, Hume's radical empiricism and skepticism were already well known, with his denial of cause and effect in treatise, The Cause of Accusations Against Him of Atheism, explains Gaskin. Paul Russell argues that treatise, while considered a non-religious work, is part of Hume's irreligious project, contending that the key to understanding the tension between Hume's skepticism and naturalism is Hume's irreligiosity. In addition, Hume applied the method of observation and empiricism conceptually developed in treatise to the natural history of religion in the form of a historical approach. The natural history of religion can be viewed as a covert attack on both theism and polytheism, as a kind of superstitious myth-making by men to satisfy their own psychological needs and not a true belief. While Hume appears to be criticizing polytheism, these criticisms can similarly be applied to theism. Theism is the class of religions where Christianity, considered the true religion in his time and country, is classified. This is hence a disguised attack on Christianity, but formulated in a way that grants Hume what Bailey and O'Brien termed plausible deniability. As one front of a multi-pronged attack, the natural history of religion discredits religion through examining the philosophical anthropology of men, arguing that man's approach to religion essentially makes belief in God absurd. But even if man's belief was based on reason, religious belief still fails, as Hume demonstrates in Dialogues, where he attacks the reasoning behind religion. Philo, the main character, disputes the teleological argument from design asserted in the natural history of religion as a poor or failed analogy, since we have no experience in the formation of the world, and hence cannot make the analogy central to the teleological argument. Besides, the world is imperfect, and a theology, arguing that it is made by an inferior deity, is quite feasible. In addition, alternatives to the argument from design do exist, such as generation or emanation, and arguing that life comes from design is simply begging the question. While Hume holds that polytheism is an inferior religion in the natural history of religion, in yet another alternative cosmogony, he had Philo argue that just as a house or a ship requires many men to build, the world could likewise require multiple gods to construct. While readers may suspect that Philo's position is representative of Hume's, W.B. Connerton argues that the attempt to identify one character or another, Philo or Cleanthes, though never demure, with Hume, has increasingly given way to readings of the dialogues that emphasize the interplay between the three speakers. Regardless whether Philo or Cleanthes represent Hume, these characters still pose powerful arguments that attacks the reasoning behind religion. Turning to Hume's personal religious conviction, Hume seems to vacillate on his position from book to book or even within the same book, as I allege that he does in the natural history of religion. He is clearly irreligious, but given the mores of his times, Hume clearly understood how it might be necessary to conceal his true position. Referring to Galileo's astronomic discoveries, which led to a heresy conviction, Philo says, "The first writer on that subject had the full force of prejudice to encounter, and were obliged to turn their arguments on every side in order to render them popular and convincing." This might well have referred to Hume's own vulnerable position, as he was aware of his reputation as an atheist, though he had not explicitly in his oeuvre denied the existence of God. His alleged atheism was enough to cause him to be almost excommunicated, and he was passed over twice for academic positions in his home country of Scotland. An alternate position of attenuated deism has been suggested by Gaskin, where Hume may have given a qualified assent to the existence of God, though he denies that religion has any moral claim upon us, nor we upon it. In support of this view in Hume's own writing, one can almost hear Hume's voice when Philo says, "Notwithstanding the freedom of my conversation and my love of singular arguments, no one has a deeper sense of religion impressed on his mind, or pays more profound adoration to the divine being, as he discovers himself to reason in the inexplicable contrivance and artifice of nature." However, I believe the strongest and most consistent position will be to consider Hume simply as a skeptic. In the conclusion to the natural history of religion, Hume himself implies that maintaining a skeptical position may be best, writing, "The whole is a riddle, an enigma, an inexplicable mystery. Doubt, uncertainty, suspense of judgment appear the only result of our most accurate scrutiny." On the last pages of Dialogues, Philo declares, "To be a philosophical skeptic is, in a man of letters, the first and most essential step towards being a sound believing Christian." Confronted with a mystery such as God, Hume's position of skepticism seems most reasonable, and as Philo describes, a struggle to discover the truth and not simply accept received dogma is required in order to be a good believer. In this way, Hume can remain open to a belief in God, should the doubts he raised be effectively countered, while remaining intellectually honest by maintaining a skeptical attitude until proven otherwise. This position is also consistent with his argument that a theism riddled with superstition is as absurd as polytheism, while leaving open the possibility that if superstition can be overcome so that man can have a sincere and honest approach to God, then that theism will be more palatable. In conclusion, in the natural history of religion, Hume is making a covert attack on religious belief, both on polytheism and theism, despite what on the surface appears to be an encomium to theism. He does this by first discrediting the belief of the polytheists, which arises from fear and superstition rather than true belief, that is, a respect, love, or innate knowledge of their gods. He then mounts the same accusation on the deists, who has the same motivations of fear and superstition, and likewise a lack of true belief. This implies that both groups have a false belief, or what Hume calls a superstitious atheism. While he seems overtly to be criticizing polytheism, the same criticisms also work against theism, making the natural history of religion an anthropological attack on both traditions. He completes this attack in the dialogues, where even if man had proceeded from reason in his religion, this reason is still plagued with flaws and contradictions. Building on treatises Foundation of Skepticism and Empiricism, The Natural History of Religion and Dialogues forms a comprehensive attack on religion from the two critical angles of anthropology and reason, leading to a knockout blow for religious belief. Thank you. The script will be available exclusively on Patreon for now, and if you wish to support the Philosophical Bachelor, you can do so at worldwideweb.patreon.com/philosophicalbachelor.